You escaped the forest. You found all the pieces. You repaired the road. You became a legend. Wear it proudly. Pick up a Legend t-shirt or hoodie available now, only on Teaser. And you too will be a gaming god.
The path to becoming a professional voiceover actor has changed immensely over the past, now 15 years, just about, that I've been doing this. And I was asked by Kessa, who said they really enjoy my career-related content, talking about what they don't tell you about voice acting, and a glimpse into how I got into it, what I would do differently, and how I anticipate AI is going to potentially influence things. So I'm calling this the past, present, and future of voice acting. This is going to be a little freeform because I'm going to talk about just sort of all of my experiences with everything about this industry, and from before I was doing it to when I was doing it, and even now as I'm looking to the future of how I think it is going to go for everyone at large. So I'll start with my first kind of understanding of it. I became aware of what voiceover was from a very young age, because as I've talked about countless times, my older sister Allison was one of the lead actors on a live action Nickelodeon show called The Adventures of Pete and Pete, where she played Ellen. And when they were doing that early batch of shorts before the show got picked up to be a full series, she was the opening tag voiceover actor for that, which was the Nickelodeon presents The Adventures of Pete and Pete. And then she went on from there to do voiceover commercials for like Kmart and stuff like that, and Pizza Hut and that kind of thing. And so I understood that being an actor from a very early, still in my single digits, was something that you did, and that it's what's called a TV show because people are putting on a show in that sense. So, and that didn't ruin the magic for me. That was just like, oh, okay. And then, of course, also I do remember seeing a lot of those early behind the scenes videos that Disney would do showing, the voice actors for the big, Disney animated features, like recording in the booth and doing the voices. And then also I think Nickelodeon did that a couple times with some of their other shows. I remember distinctly there was a video they had of the cast of Ah Real Monsters, the three main characters in that, and I think the Angry Beavers actors as well. And I just thought that was really cool, and seeing how that goes. So I understood it. It didn't break the magic for me, but I didn't start really, really wanting. I didn't even start thinking about doing it at all until much later, when the anime world kind of, took over my day to day. And a lot of people that are hardcore fans of Tome and all the many incarnations of that probably know this. But when I was on the now defunct, rest in peace, TV Tome forums, that would have been around probably 2003. That was the site that I finally started learning the names and the full resumes of the voice actors in the cartoons that anime and video games and whatever that I was watching, and starting to catalog, understanding like, oh, okay, this person does this voice and this person does this character, and yada yada yada, and becoming just obsessed with when I realized, wait, the guy who does Dog on Cat Dog is also SpongeBob for Nickelodeon, but he's also Carl from Johnny Bravo. Like it kind of sparked from that sort of thing, and then I never stopped. So, and then kind of as those next couple of years started, and I was really watching like countless anime all the time, and starting to recognize a lot of voices from show to show, and realizing, oh, okay, there are different places in New York and Texas and LA and Canada that do these shows, and then all these projects that I'm watching and experiencing and everything. It's like, oh, okay. So they have like studios and talent pools of people that they draw from. and kind of understanding that, like, at least often it was the case in the anime world, that if there was a major player in town, in which, you know, in the case of New York, it was 4Kids. With Dallas, it was Funimation. With Vancouver, it was Ocean. But not that those were the only recording studios in, you know, all of in all the city. That was kind of just the fandom perception of if they were doing everything you were watching on, you know, Kids WB or Cartoon Network, or, you know, with the Toonami block or Adult Swim or whatever, you know, you'd be hearing them a lot, and then you'd assume, oh, okay, that's why for a long time, and I've joked about this, I just did the interview with Scott McNeil, if you guys haven't seen that, this past month, but, or rather, sorry, within this month, you know, there was a perception, like in Canada, which I became very obsessed with, the talent pool up there. You know, the Ocean Studios, which is one place particularly that did a lot of cartoons and anime dubs that, you know, were very prominent in the 90s and 2000s. You know, they were also called the Ocean Group. And because they did so much stuff, people just assumed if anything came out of Vancouver, they just figured, oh, it's an Ocean dub. It's the Ocean Group or whatever. And when in reality, that's one studio in all of Vancouver, like the entire city. There's like countless studios that do all these different things. And same thing, even in 4Kids, you know, in New York, like people thought, oh, it's just that those are the 4Kids actors, when in actuality, you know, there'd be all these other places, Central Park Media and Media Blasters, and, you know, I forget the place in Tarrytown that did a lot of stuff. The Joe DeGiorgi ran. There was another one that was up there that I'm forgetting the name of. And of course, MYV Post, you know, back in the day with Berserk and all these kind of things. And, you know, but just because 4Kids happened to be kind of the main one that was prominent and people were hearing everybody all the time, they just assumed, oh, that's the big one, obviously, right? But yeah, so that I became this kind of, you know, Rolodex of voice actors and studios and different things. And funnily enough, before I was even really thinking about being an actor myself, because I was still so obsessed with wanting to make my own shows and wanting to do my own thing and create stuff, I was thinking about casting before anything else. I was thinking about casting, and now I have the privilege of getting to do that professionally. I've cast quite a number of projects, mostly video games. And some animation stuff, some indie things, and which I'm very happy about, because I get to, you know, use that skill. And actually, there's even been some cases where I've brought some folks that, you know, I grew up with, that either haven't been doing this for a long time because they're not thought of anymore, or that just, you know, kind of semi-retired. I've kind of been able to give them back opportunities, which I feel really good about. So that's a lot of fun. But I was thinking about it a lot, in particular, because I was thinking of, oh, who would I cast? Now, this is something really ironic. I've been starting to put some more stuff out there about Balancing Act recently, which was for those of you who don't know this, because probably a lot of you mainly know me for creating Tome. Prior to Tome, Balancing Act existed. Balancing Act was the very first, like, large scale, I want to do this as a full story, you know, someday as like a series or a movie or whatever, that I made when I was very young, and I've been slowly developing it in the background the last, you know, 30 years at this point through my life. But I thought about, okay, you know, if I did this, who are all the actors that I would get to play my characters in the series, right? And so I had all these thoughts about, you know, the different actors that I would want to cast. And originally I had these different thoughts about, oh, maybe I could get, you know, this actor from this place, you know, like, oh, I'll get this guy from Canada, and I'll get this actor from Texas, and this actor from LA, and, you know, et cetera, and all these different things. And I realized soon after, as I was learning more, it's like, well, that doesn't really work that way. You can't just magically get actors from 2 to 3 to 4 different locations and just have them all be in the same thing. It's typically, if the project goes to this studio, they're only getting actors in that territory. The irony, of course, being now, well, and not even just now, but I mean, back when I was even doing my independent stuff, I was getting actors from all over the world back then. So I was already kind of living that dream in terms of, and actually even skipping ahead a bit, one of the first guys that I ever worked with as a freelance animator was a guy named Alex. I used to do a lot of commission, like flash animation for this thing he was doing called Sketchy Folk many years ago. I remember he said to me once, he's like, you know what, Chris, when you're an artist and you're like just doing whatever you can, you kind of work with the tools that you have. So don't it's great to have dreams and think about like who you want to work with someday, but utilize what it is that you have at your disposal. And then that was something that actually really got me to try to expand outward and start amassing a pool of talent of people that were on the internet doing amateur voiceover, and that led to me meeting people like Kira Buckland and Edwin Tiong and Lucian Dodge and a lot of guys like that in those early days, that then I went on to work with and a lot of my indie animation stuff, funnily enough. But yeah. But originally I was thinking to myself, like, I'll get people from all over the world. And now it's actually quite, it's simple to do such a thing, funnily enough. But then I had a phase where I'm like, okay, I'm going to just get, people from this one particular territory because that's the way that it works, at least from my perspective back then. And so, funnily enough, a lot of my first dream casts that I had for my own cartoons, including actually both Balancing Act and TTA, when I was doing that very first incarnation of Tome, I envisioned quite a few cases where I'll get Canadian actors, I'll get Ocean Dub, Vancouver voice actors. And I'm trying to even remember some of the choices that I had, back then that I can think of off the top of my head. I do remember particularly, I think I had in my head, I had Sam Vincent as Alpha and Brad Swale as Nylock. I think maybe Kelly Sheridan for Flame Girl. I don't remember who I might have thought of for Kerberfer, because I wasn't even thinking about doing it myself. So that goes to show, literally, I was thinking about casting before anything to do with acting in the voiceover world. Believe it or not. That's how unegotistical I was about it. Now I'm just a raging egomaniac when it comes to voiceover stuff. But and I when in terms of when I started wanting to do it myself, I can't even. No. I do remember exactly what it was, because when I thought about the alternative of, what if I did my original animated cartoon thing in Texas, because they don't do original animation in Texas. They really only do anime dubs and some video games. So I thought, well, what if I was the first person that did an original American cartoon, and the whole cast were Texas Funimation voice actors or something, right? And I thought at the time I was obsessed with Yu Yu Hakusho, and I still love that show. That is still, if you gun to my head, sometimes often I'll answer that as my favorite anime of all time, and it's definitely among them for sure. But I love that show very dearly. And Justin Cook was one of a few actors that I heard that, to me, I'm they kind of sound like me a little bit. They kind of sound similar to my voice a little bit, and I feel like maybe I could kind of come close to something like that. And so I loved Yusuke as a character so much. I loved his I don't care kind of charismatic attitude, but still had a lot of energy to him and stuff. He was this kind of young punk kind of thing that I just thought was great. And he had such awesome dialogue. I love the dub script of Yu Yu Hakusho as well. So I started doing impressions of him. And around the same time as that, also Mega Man NT Warrior was airing on Kids WB. And as I talked to Carl Willems, if any of you guys have not seen my interview with Carl Willems from last year, who directed a lot of shows at Ocean, including Mega Man, there were so many good kid actors in that show, really, really good actors that had the realistic kid sound. And guys like Alex Dodok and eventually Brad Swale, who was a kid actor when he started, Bill Switzer, Andrew Francis, all these kind of guys, Reese Thompson, Tony Sampson, he was a kid when he started, they were all so good. And I learned so much from them. And Lan in particular, the Alex Dodok version of Lan in the early, probably the first 26 episodes of Mega Man, I was he kind of also sounds like me a little bit. So it was hearing these actors, often I've heard a thing about when you see yourself in a character and you feel represented on screen in a certain sense. I kind of felt represented in that, Lan and Yusuke, both those two characters, that to me, they felt like I related to them in certain senses, not super hard as a person, probably more so Lan than Yusuke, because Yusuke, I wasn't nearly as much of a bad boy as he was, but it was their voices and their personalities that I just thought were so cool, and I related to a lot and wanted to be like them. So I think that it was because of that I started kind of doing impressions of them and thinking about what if I just the thought of like, what if I did this? Then when I got into doing animation, because I wanted to get to a point where I could make my own stuff and bring stuff like Balancing Act and Tome to life, probably around, that would have been 2004 or so. And I started making my first Flash cartoons, and just kind of out of what I had to work with, doing voices in my own cartoons, just out of necessity. And the early people that I worked with for the first couple like voiced things that I made were people off of an old message board that I used to go to called the Fallout Shelter, which is long since dead for like, God, probably 20 something years at this point. And I was just said, if you have a microphone, let me know. And if you want to do a voice, it was that simple. And then I started meeting people, like I mentioned before, like Kira and Edwin and, guys like that were taking it seriously and wanted to become professionals at it. And a lot of which now are doing that, as a matter of fact, and making quite a nice living as professional voiceover actors, which I think is incredible. And, I started to understand, these aren't just people with microphones. These are people that actually understand how to like give a good performance, and they know how to be funny, and they know how to be dramatic, and kind of vicariously through that, eventually I started directing, because it became more and more of a necessity as I started doing stuff like Parody Rangers and the Nintendo collabs. I needed to start directing my actors so that I could get what I needed from them. To be able to get the performances, like if I needed to have something delivered in a certain way, or if I needed, like a joke to land a particular way, then that led to me having to direct as well as act, because of course I was playing Kirblog and Zeto, and that was my first kind of proper full-on acting performance, was playing those characters in TTA at the time, and kind of as I was going through that, thinking to myself more and more, it's like, maybe I could actually do this. Maybe if I really did apply myself, and maybe if I just met the right person, maybe it's humanly possible that I could do this professionally someday. I don't know. So I started going to conventions, and I mentioned the Fallout Shelter was one forum. I frequented quite a few anime forums, including a place called Anime on DVD, which I think is now the Fandom Post. And it was a site where actually quite a few people in the anime dubbing world, a lot of which, actually including Justin Cook, who I had met at one of the first big conventions I ever went to, which was Otakon 2005. I went up to him and I told him he's my favorite actor, and I learned a lot from him. He was very nice, and I've gone, over the years, gotten to be a friend of Justin. He's been very, very kind, and I've not gotten the chance to actually like full on like work with him on my own project yet. I've gotten to direct him for another project briefly, but not for my own stuff, which I want that to happen someday for sure. But I started meeting a lot of these guys. In particular, I was meeting a lot of the guys at Funimation, and some folks from around different places as well, here and there, and they started to remember who I was. And I was starting to pick up on, like, if you were a fan and you were cool and you were, like, not weird or too overbearing or nice, I'll never forget, actually, a guy who not only has been a friend for many years, but now I've gotten to work with professionally quite a few times, because he has gone on to cast me in a few projects. We worked on Psyche K together, the Netflix season of that, and a couple other series, some video games, Shenmue 3 we worked on together. And he's directed a lot of my favorite shows that were ever done at Funimation when he worked there. But Chris Bevins, who people probably know best as he's the voice of B the Dog from Dragon Ball Z, and he's Hanta Seto, the tape guy from My Hero Academia. I'll never forget the first time I went up to him and I met him at a convention, I think at Anime Expo, probably 2007, I think. He was there, and I went up to him. And I gave him I used to do this thing. You could probably still find these on my DeviantArt. I used to do these prints of voice actors that I knew I was going to meet at a convention. And I would draw like an anime version of them, and they would have a bunch of their characters all kind of surrounding them. And I would draw that and give that to them. And they were always so like taken aback by it. They thought that was so cool. And Chris was like, wait, you're Kirblog? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh yeah, I know who you are. And I'm like, oh God, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. So, and then I probably shouldn't admit this, but there were some people that I was even meeting that were kind of in with these companies, and sometimes they would like tell me stuff that like that was like not known. They're like, hey, we just got this show, and oh, this character's coming up, and we just cast this person or whatever. And I'm like, I shouldn't be knowing this, but I made a positive enough impression on these guys that they would be very kind and personable, and they would always like kind of take some extra time to talk to me, and because I think that they could also tell you know what, I didn't come off as too hungry. By that I mean like I wasn't too like desperate for like, oh, I really want to, you know, do this and work for you someday or whatever, like that. Not really. And actually I even remember the first time that I really went for that and did that. I went to this is really funny. Okay, I don't think I've ever told this story on any Kirblog before, but so I think it was 2008 at Anime Fest New York. I think that was before New York Comic Con kind of swallowed up that convention and made it into just a part of it. Funimation was premiering Soul Eater, and they had the whole cast there to promote it because it was their big show of the year, right? And so I drew a stupid illustration I made of all the main characters together, and I drew their actors like dressed up as their characters, and I drew little caricatures of each of them on these little like index cards, and I gave them to all the actors. I went down in a row, and it's so funny, like I've gotten to like be friends with like quite a few, you know, I'm trying to think of like, you know, Monica Rial and like Jeremy Lee and Todd Haberkorn, Micah Solusad, God, I'm trying to remember who all the people in the cast, you know, like a good chunk of them I've gotten to like become friends with, and I've worked with them on quite a few things, them directing me on things and me casting them on things, and they're wonderful people, and they're all so talented, and they did such a good job in that show. And Zach Bolton, who now is one of the producers, he's one of the heads of production at Crunchyroll, which the artist formerly knows as Funimation. He was directing that show, and he was there too. And I remember I went down the autograph line, and I gave them all their little prints, and they were all like freaking out, and they were cool. And I talked with each of them, and they were, you know, I was making a good impression. I was like, yes, I won. I did really good. And so sometime after, I had like a moment to talk with Zach, and I told him, hey, I kind of white lied a little bit. I said, hey, I'm starting to do some professional stuff here in New York. I wasn't yet, but I'll get to that. But I was kind of trying to insinuate I'm taking this seriously, and I know that there are some people that will fly down to Texas to record for stuff, and I was cool about it. I was cool about it, and he was like, yeah, maybe we could talk about that at some point. And he seemed like kind of genuinely open to the prospect of like if I were to come down and do stuff in Texas, which eventually I did, and I'll get to that later, but. So that it didn't happen necessarily, but because I had been trying to, you know, I wanted to. By that point, I was okay. Let me back up a little bit. In college, I was starting to really be like, you know what? I think I want to try to pursue this in some way. And I didn't really go about it the right way. I tried hitting up some people. I tried reaching out to certain folks. I didn't even think to actually hit up 4Kids, which here's a really, really sad, ironic thing. 4Kids was right next to where I was living for 4 years in New York City when I went to college. When I was going to the School of Visual Arts and studying 2D animation, 4Kids' office was around the fucking corner from where I lived. So I could have maybe tried to be like, hi, here's a demo or something, like just to try to get in and do like something with them, you know what I mean? And I only ever had a single audition. Little quick side story. I had one audition at 4Kids for Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, and Darren Dunstan, who's the voice of Pegasus, and he's directed Yu-Gi-Oh! For many years now. He was very nice, and then I never got called back again. So maybe I didn't make the best impression. Maybe I didn't wow them with what my ability was. I was also reading for I read for, like, if any of you guys know Zexal, I read for like Dr. Faker and like Mr. Heartland, which were not characters that I was a good fit for at all. So I probably didn't make a very good impression, but it was still fun, and it was cool just to be in the 4Kids office and etc. So yeah, way too old. I was probably like 21 or something when I did that, and that was, I had been doing some voice. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I had done my first couple voiceover gigs by that time, but so I'd been kind of knocking on some doors and trying to figure some stuff out. It didn't really happen. And then I have told this story many, 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 many times, so I'll kind of speed through this. But I competed in a contest at New York Anime Fest, 2 directors that were doing it at the time. I won the contest. My prize was getting an audition for Pokemon in 2008 or 9, I can't remember. And then a year later, I got another audition, and it turned out to be for Corey, I think. Yes. Yeah. And then I booked that, and that was the very tail end of 2009. I recorded those 5 episodes of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, and that was my very first time working as a professional voiceover actor. And I was on cloud 9, and I couldn't believe my life. And I learned, so on that subject, in New York, it was a very small pool of people. Like very, very small. Now there's a lot more folks. There's newer people, and they've also opened up to remote guys for some of the studios in town that are still doing stuff. There's places like 3 Beeps and the Konami studio, which was formerly for kids, and now it's just a place where they record Yu-Gi-Oh! And NYV Post, who I work for also as a writer, they have a They have a New York location, which I went on to do some stuff shortly after that. It's a very tight-knit community. A lot of the guys there were very, very, very private. And this is not a huge mystery, but as a lot of people know, a huge chunk of the very known voice actors that worked in New York, they used pseudonyms because a lot of them were also theater actors and did on-camera stuff in the city. And most of the voiceover stuff in New York, for like anime dubbing and a lot of the things that people know them for, a lot of it was non-union. So they were all coming up with fake names. There were some people there were exceptions. There were guys like Eric Stewart and Mark Thompson that have just used their real names for everything. But yeah, so a lot of people are very quiet, very private. Not a lot of them did conventions, like Dan Green, for example. Dan Green was super, super mysterious and private, and now he does conventions all the time. But back then, he was not. And actually, he was one of the first people that, funnily enough, Dan Green, the voice of Yugi from Yu-Gi-Oh, of course, and many other things. He was one of the first people that I learned from as a teacher, because he, I don't know if he still does, but he was a voice coach at one of the studios that I worked with in town, where I did actually a lot of my other early gigs. I did a lot of video game, like edutainment type, like kind of Learning League and Jumpstart, like that type of stuff, like Leapfrog, those kind of edutainment PC games. I did quite a bit of stuff there. They did the X-Men motion comics, the Uncanny X-Men, Astonishing X-Men, and stuff like that, which was really cool. And he was great. I did an interview with him for a school project, got an A on that, which was very nice. So but it was a small community. I met folks there. I met people like Eileen Stevens and actually Sean Schummel when he was still living there at the time. I ran into him quite a few times. Michael Sinner-Nicholas, who I went on to work with. I did my next few anime shows I did with NYV Post. I did Bakuman and the Berserk movies and Queen's Blade, which was like kind of a booby show, and a really beautiful movie called Patima Inverted I did there, and they were just so much fun. Stephanie Shea would come down to visit New York, and we record together at the studio, and I got to know them, and now I've become good friends with them and worked on a lot of projects doing writing and voices and stuff. So they're always a joy to be part of. But very, very small community, and so I left that behind. I feel it would suck that I kind of missed the boat on, what was really happening out there, like what the whole sort of the golden age of New York voiceover. I kind of missed the boat on that. But my eye on the prize was LA, because I knew that everything, voiceover and animation and creation, everything I wanted to do was out there. Or rather, I should say out here, because I've been living here now close to 11 years. Coming up in a couple months, it'll be 11 years I lived in LA. So, but I moved to LA, and all the while I was continuing to amass a talent pool of really, really cool folks in New York, not in New York, on the internet, I should say, on the internet that I had worked with on my various animation projects by that point. By the time that I was leaving for LA, I had been working on the Tome 2011 web series by that point, with a whole cast of really incredible people, upcomers and veterans and YouTubers, special guests and things like that, and had gotten a decent pension for directing and for writing and for casting and for acting myself, right? So when I moved to LA and I had that opportunity, the nice thing was I had amassed enough of a body of work in New York that when I went to LA, that I was very lucky that I had folks such as Ben Diskin and Mona Marshall and Yuri Lowenthal, who I had become friends with through talking with them and getting them interested in working on Tome, actually, to do guest voices. And they were just wonderful to me, and they recommended me to a lot of the studios that I got in with within my first year alone. interesting. The very first thing that I did, actually, I think I can talk about this now. My very first actual recording that I ever did was for a pilot that I recorded with Mona Marshall and the late, great David Mallow, of Fooly Cooly and Power Rangers and Digimon fame, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. He passed over the last couple of years. But I met him at that first recording studio that I went to. He was very nice, and actually gave me kind of an interesting perspective that has to do with this. Dave Mallow told me, because, I mean, if those of you who don't know, also, Dave Mallow has been around since, like, basically the dawn of anime dubbing in LA, in particular, since, like, the 80s and early 90s. And he was like, I've been in this business a long time, and from studio to studio, different places see me as a different kind of actor. At one studio, they hear me as the announcer type, like, today on Power Rangers type thing. On another place, they hear me as villains and, evil type things. At other places, they hear me for creatures and, monster type stuff, because he did quite a few creature type. He was the hero. He was originally the voice of Akuma on Street Fighter 4 and a couple games after that for a while. And so I learned that from him early on, and it was interesting because then shortly after I did that, my first full project that I did, the first full on thing that actually came out that I worked on when I moved to LA was Tales of Zestiria. At Cup of Tea, they were looking for a batch of new folks to audition for the newest Tales game. And because there was a thing at the time where they seemed like they were kind of making sure to not repeat any of the same actors as the playable characters from game to game. So I had an opportunity, and I read for all the main characters. And the stuff that I had been doing in New York, I was playing a lot of like high-pitched characters and kids and stuff. And these kind of guys, sometimes even characters played by women in the Japanese version, which was not a common thing. And I don't ever get to do that anymore, to be honest. It's rare when I even get to play young characters anymore, to be honest. But that was most of what I was doing in New York. And so when I read for all the Zestiria characters, reading for Mikleo and Saray, thinking, I probably my best shot is with them. And then it turned out I booked Dezel. And of all things, I had been practicing, that kind of darker sort of thing, because by that point I had a few years experience voicing Zeto on Tome, and I've done a couple of. I even remember actually this. Okay, this is silly. The guy who cast me on Pokemon at the time, he only ever saw me as like a kid voice, which is funny because when characters like Chorus and Berg and Bryson came up, I didn't even get to audition for them in the main Pokemon anime. Oh, the irony, because I was considered too young. So he didn't think of me for older characters. Like, I was only ever called in for kids. And then the first adult that I ever voiced was I did that movie Patema Inverted, which is really cool. You should look that up. Patema Inverted, Patema Inverted. Really cute little movie. And I was the sad backstory flashback adoptive dad character of the main girl, who was voiced by the lovely Cassandra Morris. Because she was a New Yorker originally. She did stuff in New York before she moved to LA, actually. And I played this character named Lagos who sounded like this. And he was like, oh, come on, like, you got to follow your dreams someday, little one. And that was my first time playing an older character. And I remember telling that director that, and he's like, was this dad like 17? And I'm like, oh, thanks. All right. Really appreciate that. So I'd started getting to do older stuff by that point. And so Dezel was my first, thing out of the gate that I got. And I'm like, well, okay, I guess my balls finally dropped. Cool. So, that happened. And then in my first year of doing stuff, I did stuff like Lord Oroko from A Lull in the Sea, Nagino Asukara, and Void Dark from Disgaea 5 as well. So suddenly my whole archetype was changing. The type of stuff that I was being thought of and getting cast as when I started getting up at these studios, because I thankfully to like Mona Marshall, she not only gave me that first job, but she also recommended me to Bang Zoom and to Studiopolis. Ben recommended me to Cup of Tea, like all these places. So I was very lucky that these guys, they already saw that I had ability, I had a demo, I had experience, and they felt comfortable with recommending me, because that was the thing is, there were more and more new folks that were getting into this. There were new people kind of getting into the fold by that time, but it was very seldom. It was not quite as often as it is now, where new people pop up quite a bit. Back then, there was a lot of vetting, between the different kind of communities and things, because LA was like multiple, there's a lot of crossover from studio to studio, but there were certainly like, it became a generational thing at that point where like there were, the different like kind of sects of people. And then there became a lot of folks that moved from Texas and New York, different, sort of places and all that kind of thing. But it was cool. And so I kind of got into the fold and I started to get to know a lot of people. And thankfully I mostly made good impressions on folks. And so I started getting called in a lot more. And by the time that I booked Reagan in probably 2016, I think 2016 or 17, then I started really establishing myself. And then it became my living, and it became what I was able to do and pay most of my bills off of on a frequent basis, was doing that. I started doing a lot of video games, and I started getting recommended to different places, and just meeting more and more directors, and just really putting myself out there, and it paid off a lot, and then it became very consistent. And funnily enough, I forgot to mention this part. This doesn't have to do with the acting part, but this is going to get to a bigger point later on. Is I wasn't doing a lot of conventions because I just didn't really pursue it. There were very few people that were like representing folks for conventions back then. There weren't like, a bunch of like talent agencies for like appearances and things. It was just kind of a case-by-case basis of cons and inviting you. Maybe they'd contact you through your agent or directly or whatever it was. But I wasn't doing a lot of conventions back then. I did more conventions when I was guesting as like Kerbifer, as like an internet person, and like doing my Nintendo stuff and the parodies, and I was involved with the abridged stuff and all that kind of, everything back in the late 2000s and the early 2010s. Like that was more of that time for me, you know what I mean? So when I started actually like doing stuff that when I look back now, I had no business being invited to conventions and like getting to be a guest at cons, because of other people recommending me and like me reaching out and kind of like imposing myself or whatever. Like when I became an actor, then I couldn't even get arrested, like getting invited to a convention. That was barely happening. And the culture of that has changed a lot, and I'll get to that later. But little side note I'll mention, I did eventually, pretty shortly after moving, and it was thanks to Tales of Zestiria, I got to accomplish a dream I got to finally work for Funimation, and I got to go work in Texas. Because when we were doing that show, that was the beginning of Funimation basically renting out spaces in LA and using some of the studios out here for when the talent that they had that had either moved to LA from Texas, but they had, characters to come back and reprise, or they wanted to cast people like for guest roles. Because back then it was a very small pool of, out of towners as guests, like, Matt Mercer and Taliesin Jaffe and Patrick Seitz and Johnny on Bosch, a very small handful of those folks that would come to visit, and they would, stay on and sleep on somebody's couch and record a box set's worth of episodes and then go home and then come back later or whatever. That was the way that it kind of worked back then. So, at that time, that was the beginning of them renting another studio, and so they brought back as many of the original cast of Tales of Zestiria to reprise their roles as they could. But we were renting a studio, and then me and Kira Buckland, we went down to visit Texas, and we recorded I think 2 or maybe 3 episodes while we were there, and because we wanted to just see what it was like. So we worked with the great Tyler Walker, who's now no longer directing. I think he's a writer now. I think he's still writing for Crunchyroll, if I'm not mistaken. But we were there, and while we were visiting, we got to work with Mike McFarland and Chris Bevins and Afia Yu, other people that were directing there at the time. They just threw us in for some of the little, guest roles, some little walk-on bits and things while we were visiting. I was so jealous because Kira got to work on One Piece before I did. She got to do a mermaid character in the Fishman Island arc when they were recording that at the time, and I didn't get to do anything on the show until Wano, like years later. I was like, oh man, and that finally happened. And I was so happy about that. That was a lot of fun. So, and the culture there was really interesting. It's in Texas. It seemed like it was this case where it was a small little group of folks, and I think about how so many of them were friends, and they were directing and engineering and writing, and all in the cast, and so they were all kind of on the same page, and it felt like they were kind of making like a project together. And there's some studios that kind of still feel like that now. And I think that there is sort of like a fun familial sort of aspect to that when it's like you're all on the same page, you have an understanding of what the source material is, you know, you want to make it good, you've got a good cast of actors, you've got like a good set of everybody, and then you just like do the show and you have fun. It's like it's a good sort of rapport when you have people like that. Sometimes it's a little bit more like just it's just a cold production. Like you just get the people, they come in, they do it, they say their lines, they go home, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that, because sometimes if you get a great product as a result of that, then whatever, like you get what you get, and then the show turns out great, or you know, whatever it is. But it was a different sort of culture. And I remember even at one point we looked at each other and we were like, it'd be kind of fun to live here and, you know, kind of be part of this world. But, you know, Kira and I both were kind of on the same page of like, well, but then we'd only be working for one company. You know, like there's just Crunchyroll, there's Sentai Filmworks, which is in Houston, which is several hours away. And then there's like a couple places, Gearbox and Okatron, which do video games once in a while. But, you know, I've been lucky actually with Okatron, for example, I've been very lucky that I've gotten to work on quite a few projects with them between like Dragon Ball and Ultraman and Trails of Cold Steel and those kind of things that they've done there. And I've written for them too, like I have with MYV Post, and, you know, they're all great people, all the folks on production there. So, and I've been able to do that from LA because they also now have an LA space that they use for a lot of their productions and everything, which is awesome. So, yeah, quite a few studios, these companies have, you know, like facilities in multiple places, because if they work with talent on a regular basis from different places, then they can do that. Unless, or if they're working with people that have remote studios, which that's become a big thing of you know, the norm now. And so now also, interestingly, so the pandemic hit when I was in my hibernation for a year and a half, and I didn't have the space nor the money to, you know, to even build a home recording studio. So the little bit of work that I was doing at that time was, you know, it all had to be in studio. And that was a time where barely anybody was coming in studio at all. The nice thing was it did open the door for people that lived not in the major centers, you know, people that didn't necessarily live in LA, Texas, New York, Vancouver, Toronto, you know, whatever. They, you know, there were places anywhere, but they just had a good studio. And that's become the you know, a thing now where certain folks, if they're really, you know, well-known and prestigious and have a good body of work and a good, you know, rapport with certain companies and certain casting people and whatever, they can record from anywhere and they can just do whatever. There's people that have moved from LA that are some of the top working voiceover people, like Roger Craig Smith and Trevor Duvall and Jason Marsden, you know, that have moved out of LA, and they're doing just fine, like with their home studios, you know. So yeah, it really depends, you know, from you know, person to person and case by case. I prefer to go in. I always, if I have the ability, even if I'm directing, like I've gone to assistant direct on some projects, and if I have the opportunity, I always want to go into the studio. I still, to this day, do not have a home studio. I have my little crappy, if I'm auditioning for something, I have my little crappy same USB Samson C01U microphone that I've had, I think, since like my Newgrounds days in the mid 2000s that I do auditions for. If I want an audition to sound really, really, really good, I will borrow someone else's studio. Often I'm borrowing Marissa Lenti's home booth or Mick Lauer. You know, actually, I just recently I happened to borrow Brandon Winkler's studio. He happened to be near me, and I was borrowing his place. So, and the thing is now, I mentioned the bit about conventions. What I have noticed is, so there's a lot of pros and cons to a lot of things that have happened, where there are more people that are doing this than ever. There is an abundance of people. The doors have opened quite a bit to a lot of people when it was, you know, for a long time, voiceover in all the major markets were considered to be, you know, it's a closed shop, you know, you can't get in, it's so difficult to break into this business and yada, yada. And not that it's easy, but, you know, the path to get there has changed a lot. And the way that people get, because, okay, a general sort of thing, this is stepping back and looking at the big picture and not just my own personal journey. Often the sort of common paths were you were an actor. You were like doing theater, or you were a radio, performer, commercial person, or you were an on-camera actor, or maybe a stand-up comedian, different things, all sorts of different, bits like that were the common pathways for people. And then you would meet somebody, that would happen to be, oh, I work at the studio. Hey, you should come audition for us. Or like, oh, like, you're really good. You should get an agent. And, oh, you have got a great voice. You should go out for voiceover commercials. And then they take classes with people that, are in that world doing animation, video games, and whatever, commercials and audiobooks and promos, all that kind of stuff. And so, then they would get into it, and then if they had a knack for it, they would become, proficient, and they'd go on to be, one of these big guys. And that was the traditional path. And then it started to change when the people kind of my generation, and even some of the ones after, that were not trained traditional actors. I've never been a theater actor. I don't have any form of traditional acting background whatsoever. Not at all. I have never done theater. I've never done radio. I've never done stand-up. I don't have any kind of traditional acting background at all. I have certainly taken plenty of acting classes. I've studied with really great folks, Richard Horvitz, Colette Sunderman, Chris Zimmerman, a lot of really good guys. Dan Green, I mentioned earlier, he's one of the early ones that I had. Mick Wingard I did recently, who's wonderful. A lot of really, really good folks. And I've learned a lot also, but my method was also different because I think of Corey Burton, for example. I'm not comparing myself. Corey Burton is a god of voiceover. I'm not comparing myself to his caliber at all. But he was a guy that was not coming from a traditional acting background, but he was so obsessed and studious about voiceovers specifically, that he really, really... just became so proficient at being a voiceover actor specifically. And so he was able to hollow out a career for himself doing these incredible impressions and voice matches and very hyper-specific, radio type personalities and character actors and things, Hans Conried and these kind of stuff. And then he became obviously, like a staple, a legend of Disney voiceover now, beyond comprehension, all the parks and all that stuff, And you could play a drinking game with him and Jim Cummings on Kingdom Hearts, the amount of characters they play. So, but that was kind of my deal, was I studied very hard the specifics of voiceover, like what people do. And actually, to be honest, I even kind of learned quite a bit from looking at specifically what I consider to be good voiceover and bad voiceover. I looked at bad sounding productions, video games and anime dubs and even some cartoons that I thought had bad voice acting. And I was like, why don't I like this? And sometimes even if I were to rearrange this, if I were to redo this, how would I do it and how would I improve upon it, whatever, just for practice, right? And then also studying why do I like this performance so much? What is it about this particular performance that resonates with me? What is the the quality of this actor, this voice, this character that they're doing that really, really is resonating with me and makes me want to kind of copy this and kind of take a little bit of this and whatever. Because so much of what I've done, for example, I mean, my whole Kerbifer performance is just me emulating Justin Cook as Yusuke. 100%. That's what it is. So it's and then taking that and honing it through classes and practicing a lot. To this day, I mean, even doing the Deltarune thing with Michaela and Germ right now. If you guys have not been checking that out, chapter 3 and 4 are coming soon, because chapter 2 will have been out by the time I put this Kirblog out. That's me kind of going back to those roots of I played so many RPGs and video games that didn't have voiceover and would come up with character voices on the spot, do these different things, and trying to come up with stuff. And then even for example, when I played the original Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, I might have mentioned this on the playthrough we were doing before, which we will be getting back to at some point. I think that playing through that whole game, or also reading Homestuck as well, I would come up with tons of voices. And even if by the end of like reading a whole webcomic or playing through a whole RPG, if I even found one voice, like one new character type, like fully fleshed out that I could like for I'm trying to think. Okay, like when I was reading Homestuck, I came up with some kind of thing about Gamzee, and I did like my own sort of like server dude thing, and he was kind of a cross between like this sort of surfer thing and then like Frederick Fox from the guy who created what's it called, Fox in Space, you know, and so that became something, and then I put that on one of my demos at the time. And then now I'm thankful I have a demo that is comprised of stuff that I've actually worked on professionally. But when I was coming up with stuff at the beginning, you know, I had to come up with all my own original voices, and they all came from me, you know, practicing stuff and doing things like that. And even now, I'm trying to do that with all these games that me and Michaela and Germ are playing through on a constant basis, because, you know, we're trying to. You know, we're just trying to have fun, play these games, and do this kind of performance stuff just for fun. But it's also a great, you know, bit of training to come up with like, okay, what works, what doesn't. Like, oh yeah, like my Lancer I feel is solid. My Birdly I don't think is that solid. You know, my Spamton is interesting, and I can do weird stuff with that. That's also kind of an experiment in like, you know, audio editing just as much. So, you know, it's a whole thing. But that's something that I gained a lot of experience doing, and because I prepped so hard. That was when I had my opportunity to step up and show what I was capable of, I was good enough to start working professionally, and I knew what I was doing. Because when I look back at my first job, when I look back at those Pokemon episodes I did in 2009, I'm like, you know what? They still hold up. I actually did a decent job. Because we're so critical of ourselves, and there's performances I've done where I'm like, I don't think I was the best for that role, or I think I could have done something more interesting or whatever. But I think that's like my first performance on Pokemon, I actually was like, you know what? I still like how that turned out, you know, which is nice to be able to look back fondly on that and not hate it. So, yeah, but so going back to, so now a lot of people like that are not traditional actors have gotten into the business. And some people that are traditional, that, you know, did the whole, you know, they studied acting and went to theater school and all that kind of thing. And they, you know, they do really well for themselves. And there's some people that have backgrounds like me where they just study voiceover really studiously and they pull it off and they make careers out of it. But it has become more and more, as the market is so flooded and casting practices have changed and trends have changed, it is extremely difficult and so rare and so hard to make a living just being a voice actor. Now, being just an actor is a different story, because if you're also doing theater, if you're also doing on camera, then that's maybe different. But even then, it's probably just as, if not more, competitive, because there's so many people doing that. But when you're doing everything, then you know, you're hedging your bets. Because the late great Kirby Morrow once said, you know, he was doing on camera and theater before he was doing voiceover, and he got into voiceover because one of his early acting teachers said, you need to make as many avenues of revenue for yourself as you possibly can to be able to survive and to make money just being a performer. There are, as I was learning from the first generation of LA people, guys like Dave Mallow and other folks I've gotten to meet, like Richard Epcar and Michael Sorich and Steve Kramer and guys like that. They were all, throughout their whole careers, they were not making a living just being an actor. They were all writing and directing as well, and casting. They were all those early, and a lot of them still to this day, quite a few of them are still. I just worked with Richard Epcar on something actually earlier this year. You know, he's directing often a lot of the Lupin. I remember I got to do Lupin Part 1 with him and his wife, Ellen. I did some small incidental characters for that, which was really cool. You know, there's a lot of guys like that, and they do adaptation. You know, they do English script writing, which now I've gotten into doing that too. So, you know, even for me, I've gotten to a point, you know, for a multitude of reasons, that you know, I'm not making a living exclusively doing voiceover anymore. And then on top of that, too, it's the convention scene and the whole culture of that. And that could be a whole separate topic, where it's like, you know, now it's this whole thing of like, well, you got to, you know, book characters that are popular that get you convention invites, and then there's the on top of that, like, oh, you know, are they popular enough? Like, do they get a Funko Pop? And then you got to sell, you know, merchandise and this whole thing. You know, like what one actor in particular, I won't say who they are, but I remember they booked a particularly really big character, and they once told me they feel more like a merchant than they do an actor. You know, they do so many conventions almost every weekend. They barely even have time to audition for stuff anymore. They go in, they'll maybe, you know, go in for reprisals of roles, but they're not even seeking new work that much anymore. They're mainly just going in to do conventions and recording on the characters that they have for as long as they go for. And just making as much money as they can, riding the high off of being, because it's now even gotten to a point where for some people, they're making more money at cons selling autographs and Funko Pops and prints and whatever than they are doing voiceover. And that kind of sucks. Like, I love doing conventions. Like, I've gotten to do a bunch more, because the kind of follow-up thought is I've done more in the last few years. I'm trying to get back into doing that again. Actually just had a conversation with both of my appearance agencies about wanting to get back into doing more shows. And as I've said, if anybody out there, if you want me to show up at a convention, you know, recommend me to, you know, whatever your local show is. Because it's another way to make money, and it is unfortunately become a necessity now. You know, it's like, because it's one thing to, and not to make this into a sob story, but it's like right now, for me personally, and I've made some TikToks about this, I'm making my living through a combination of YouTube ad revenue, Cameo, you know, like when I get booked for cameos once in a while, you know, my Patreon, the little bit that I make off Patreon, not a ton, doing freelance writing work for anime and video games, you know, some casting and directing once in a while, and you know, what the freelance, like sometimes I'll do freelance animation, like the Smiling Friend stuff, and you know, that sort of thing, but it's rare. And then whenever I book voiceover jobs, it's all of that stuff combined that I'm able to make just my rent off of. I'm not even talking about saving, you know, like there's very few people I know that are able to save money to work up enough to be able to save for buying a house or retirement, or, you know, like being able to pay off doctor bills and, you know, student loans if they went to, you know, like art schools and shit like that, you know, college, whatever. Like me, it's really hard. It's gotten to a point where now when I meet people that ask me, hey, I really want to get into voiceover, you know, what is your advice? I hate to, because back in the day, I'll go into this. Back in the day, my whole thing was often like, you know, don't do it unless it's really what you want to do more than anything else. Like, because you really need to take it seriously. You really need to know for sure that it's not just like, do you only want to do it because you want to do anime conventions, or because like you're a fan of anime, or is it really because you're an actor, like you feel that you're a performer in your soul? You know, because as I remember, actually Veronica Taylor said this, if there's anything else that you can do instead of being an actor, do that instead, because it's so difficult and so nigh impossible to make a living doing that. Most actors don't recommend it. Then I remember another piece of advice that I switched to that was a little bit more positive, and it's something I got from actually Charlie Adler, who's another person that I learned from. I took some classes with him, and he's fantastic. He talked about, he's like, you know, you got to find a really, really solid sense of oneself. You know, you need to really know who you are as a human being if you want to be a voice actor. Like, that's such an important thing to have, because I think that if your whole, and actually I mentioned Trevor Duvall briefly earlier, great thing I learned from him. And he did an interview with Colin Murdoch from Stormhawks, and they were talking about how, like, you know, you got to be a whole human being. If you've ever seen, what the hell is this? There's a movie they talked about where, like, it's about like this woman who kind of has this crazy thing where her whole triumph is like being on stage, but she loses herself in being this character, and she can't like have real relationships and emotions without being that character, you know? Like, that's all, like, she only exists through this character that she plays on stage. And it's like, you know, it's one thing to be very dedicated to your work and have your work be, you know, your main calling in life. Absolutely. But you also have to be a whole human being on top of that, because I think that there's a sense of desperation that comes with that. I think that people that are like they only, live, eat, breathe, and shit voiceover and voice acting and being an actor. Sometimes that comes off as like, you're not, because, okay, actually, one of my other bits of advice that I used to give people is there are two things that you need to be to succeed in anything artistically to work in this business. You have to be good at what you do, and you have to be a cool person that people want to work with, because you can be a cool person, and sometimes you'll even get hired, even just if people think you're cool. And they just want to be around you. And sometimes you can be really, really talented, but if you're a pain in the ass in any way, shape, or form, or even just a hint of annoying, it decreases your chances of being hired immensely, because then you work up a reputation of being a pain in the ass. I know very, very talented people like that are nice people. That obviously I won't name names, of course, but like people that are really talented voiceover actors who are very, very sweet, wonderful human beings, and they have a reputation of being a pain in the ass because they waste time, or they come off as like too much of a fan, or they come off as a little bit too amateurish, and that stunts their ability to keep getting recommended for opportunities, unfortunately. And that's a shame, because then there's sometimes other cases where there's people who are not nice, but they're good at being really cool, and they're good at being an actor, and so they're able to kind of finagle their way through having a career, because they're really good at marketing themselves. In fact, actually, I would even say there's some people that's another added factor now with the advent of social media and appearances, is sometimes if you're just really good at marketing yourself, it's the whole advent of how a lot of people that aren't even actors to begin with, that are just YouTubers or TikTok influencers, they're getting acting jobs because they're considered a name because they're really good at marketing themselves. And there are exceptions. There's people that are really good performers. That I've seen people that are YouTubers and TikTok people and whatever that don't have traditional acting backgrounds, but I give them a shot and they're really good. And they have some talent. A perfect example I can think of is Sungwon Cho. As far as I know, he does not have any kind of traditional acting background whatsoever. He was a YouTube guy, but he always wanted to be a voice actor first. And the YouTube and Vine stuff and whatever, like that was always secondary for him, but he just got really popular because of that. But he's really good at what he does, and he's really cool, and everybody wants to work with him, which is where so many of his opportunities have come from, is because of that. And that's paid off for him tremendously. You look at the career he has now, like look at how well he's doing, you know what I mean? And that makes me happy to see that, because it didn't stunt his ability to even though there are still times where even guys like him, as fantastic of an actor as he is, and he's talked about this. In fact, there was a project that both he and I were involved with that I won't mention, or maybe I've mentioned it at some point on this Kirblog and you just didn't know, where we were taken out because the casting person or one of the directors thought, oh, they're just YouTubers, they're not real actors, even though we are 100% real actors and we did a great job on that project. Go figure, But thankfully, those kind of folks that actually I should even mention too, that's another part of the game, is our fates are in the hands of the decision makers. At the end of the day, no matter how cool you are, no matter how talented you are, no matter how marketable you are, no matter how experienced you are, it comes down to the whims of the decision makers, whether that be studio owners, casting directors, show creators, the directors of the project, whatever. If somebody has any reason to not cast you and to not hire you for a job, and now especially with hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people that do this. I've had cases where I've had to cast projects and I get it down to a top 10 picks for a single character. And it literally just comes down to things as arbitrary as, has this person worked in a while? Is this person relevant right now? Is this person slightly better? These two auditions between these two actors are both like 99% equally good, but this one just edges it out just a slight percent better, or whatever. It's like, it comes down to that. It becomes that arbitrary. If you're listening to 100 auditions of the same audition for the same character, and everybody's coming to the, okay, just for example, like I'm the I don't care, trope character in this anime. You're gonna get 500 takes of everybody in the world doing the same thing, and you're gonna get probably a good chunk of them that are all gonna be really good from people that have played those characters, upwards of 10 times in other shows. But what are you going to do? Only one person can play the character. And then, then all these other factors that might have nothing to do with how good you are or whatever, any of those things I listed. And then it's just down to, okay, well, whoever picks it. So, even the stuff that I've gotten in the last couple of years, it's been down to those folks that think of me and choose me getting those opportunities. It's not always necessarily maybe because I'm so much better than everybody else or people are better or worse than me or whatever. It's just down to somebody makes a decision. And then even, there's so many cases when, even on quite a few of the projects I've done, and for Tome, like, my God, I think on the Tome web series, I think the only characters that I even auditioned on that show at all were Flame Girl and Webmaster. And then everybody else in the show, I just picked somebody. In fact, there were even some cases where, I think I talked about this on the Did You Know Gaming video I made, I went through 2 different other choices for certain characters, and then they ultimately were not available to do it, so I got somebody else to do it instead. And then that wound up with the cast that we got. And, I think, funnily enough, actually, when I did the RPG, Kerbifer was the only character that I auditioned because, when I knew that it wasn't going to be me, I wanted it, to be someone that I was comfortable with that really got the character. And even then, like, I had initially offered it to Aaron, and then it came down to him saying yes. You know what I mean? To Aaron Dismuke, I should say. So yeah, it's just these are all these little things that come down to, it's like when people ask about how do you get into voice acting, I'm just like, well, there's a million things that go into it that have nothing to do with sometimes even anything necessarily that you can do, that are even in your control, that are even within your power to do anything about. And so your margin of being able to do that, and then again, on top of, to make a living, unless you're working, another job or 2 on top of that. And I'm lucky that I'm able to at least make a living, at least make my rent at the bare minimum, doing stuff that is all related to the entertainment industry. It's all those things combined between Patreon and merch and Cameo and writing and directing and all the production stuff and acting. That's how I can survive. And so now here we are today, as we approach the era of the robots taking our jobs and running us out of town. So as of the time of this recording, we are still in the midst of a strike to try and negotiate for better AI protection, particularly on video game projects. And there are a lot of people working very hard behind the scenes to try to fight for that protection. I have been doing everything that I can to try and aid in that effort. I actually there's a project that I can talk about, funny enough, a video game project called Macho that I was of casting. I was the voice director, and I was the co-writer for the dialogue as well. I, throughout last year, when I was in hibernation a second time, I worked with quite a few folks at the union to help flip that project to be on one of the tier 1, the low budget, like indie contracts, in order to make it union and allow it to be a project that all the cast could work on. That was kind of my holiday gift to everybody. So it's still going on. There's been, I'm not even going to get into this, but there's been a lot of misinformation being thrown about the strike, left and right, that has been unfortunate, and there's been a lot of warring factions and unfortunate stuff happening with people being at odds with each other. But who knows when it's going to be over. I hope maybe within the year, if we're lucky. We'll see what happens. But it is an important thing because I as an artist as well, I do think that it is very important by that I mean like a visual artist and as well as a performance artist. It is important for us to have protection on these things because it is going to get to a point where the technology is going to get better and better. Even if it's not there right now, it's going to get better to a point where, and because it's always the matter of, again, what I said about decision makers are going to want to go with money saving options as much as possible. So, and who knows where we'll be at by 2030, but I think it is an important thing to have to foolproof, as much as humanly possible, preserving our future, ability to have this career at all. I'm very conflicted about, like, say, like the Darth Vader thing with James Earl Jones, where it's like, okay, you know, you have the right to do whatever it is that you want with your voice if you want to make some kind of digital copy or something, you know. But even I think about, like, you know, like the famous Disney characters where when actors, you know, pass away or they're no longer able to do it, and then, you know, it has to go to somebody else, you know, and then it's you know, there's a whole decision process where they pick somebody to do it, and you know, it becomes kind of like this, like almost like in some cases like an apprenticeship sort of thing, you know, and I like that. I think that's, you know, it doesn't always get to happen that way, unfortunately, because a lot of recasting situations are very different from case to case. Of course, I've been on both ends of that before, and even on the third end of having to be in charge of making those decisions too. But you know, I think when it comes to that as well, like, I don't think anybody really wants to be, you know, have their job. I've even heard from some people say, like, you know, when they've been asked by some people, like, well, what would it cost? What would it take? What would make you comfortable with, you know, how much would it cost for you to give up your voice to make a digital replica for this, and this? And somebody once said, like, I don't know, $10 million, then I'll be set for life and I'll never have to work again. But even then, it's like, nobody wants to really do that even for the money, because they want to keep working. There are so many people I know that are artists, and, you know, whether they're actors or animators or whatever, anything in between, they're like, I want to do this until I'm dead. You know, like, most artists are like, this is what I live for, like, anyway, you know? So yeah, I hope that we can all band together. It's not been an easy thing, you know. There's a lot of division with our community that has made me very sad. And I wish that there was more that can be done. You know, I do feel good about the contributions that I've made to the effort and in trying to, you know, help make things better and help provide these protections and to help, you know, keep up the fight and everything. And I don't know how much longer it's going to go for. And even, you know, when this strike and this particular fight is over, it's not like the fight itself is going to be done, because there's just, it's going to be an ongoing thing. But I want to do this forever, you know, and even for, you know, just my voiceover stuff, it's like, I faced a lot of adversity. I've had a lot of challenges, and it's not gotten any easier. In fact, it's got about 100 fucking times harder to do this and to make a living and to get to be able to do anything. But you know what? I haven't given up, and it was already difficult enough to get in, and you know, and then it's difficult to maintain it. So, you know, all in all, it's become a point now, going back to that bit about how my advice to people has changed over the years. I mean, now at this point, it's kind of circled all the way back to, like, don't do it. And not even like, oh, but if you really love acting so much, I'm just like, no, don't even do it. Like, because now the state of the world, I know this is going to sound really depressing to say this, but the state of the world has gotten so bad that, like, making a living doing anything is next to impossible. Like, you've got to get to a point where you can just be able to save up, to live, to buy a house, to start a family, to retire. And, you know, unless you luck out hardcore and you capitalize, you know, the fuck out of that, and those are rare cases, they are very small, it's not something I can recommend anymore. You know, as sad as that sounds, it's not something I even recommend. When people were to ask me, how do I get into voiceover? I'm like, don't. Do something that can make you actual money in the world that we live in now. Whatever you got to do to get to that point, that's what you got to do. Because otherwise you're not going to be able to survive. But you know what? And it's also like, I remember Christina V once talked about Mark Hamill was a guy that, not in like a mean way, but he often in a similar kind of thing to what I'm talking about, is like discouraging about being an actor. He's like, this is hard. I don't wish this on anybody. Don't get into this. But Christina was one of those people that heard that from a talk he did, and now she's doing amazingly for herself. So he followed that point up with like, anybody that doesn't listen to me when I say that, and they're able to actually make a career out of it anyway, you know what? I say good on them. That's amazing. Like, great, because it's still, the point stands of, it's so difficult to do that shit. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, like, so whether or not I've convinced anyone listening to this or otherwise, like, to pursue it or not, you know, that's the reality. like this is the world that we live in. That's what it takes. That's those are only the hurdles, and those are only the experiences from my perspective, from my journey, from what I've been through in voiceover for the last 15 years now. And it's not gotten any easier. But you know what? At the end of the day, I will say this. Throughout everything, throughout all of the hardships, every time I get to go in, even at the times that I have been the most just absolutely depressed in my life, ever, every time I get to go in the booth, hell, even every time I'm not in the booth and I'm directing somebody as well, and I get to work with another actor, I love it so much. I love it. It has not, like I said, it has not lost the magic for me. Like many things that I've grown up with and still adore that have not lost the magic to this day. And I'm very grateful for that. I'm very, very glad that as jaded and like vitriolic and like pissed off as I've gotten about the entertainment business and just everything about what it is that we deal with in general, god damn, like I still, when I step into a booth and I get to play a character and be somebody else for a couple hours or however long it is, it's the best, so that's it. That's my story. This was a long one. That was almost an hour and a half of straight talking from me. If all y'all out there listening to this made it through the whole thing, I hope that you learned something. I hope this wasn't too downtrodden and depressing to hear, some real talk. But I've always liked to be as real as possible about these things because I think that it is beneficial ultimately to people. So I do hope that that's been helpful to folks, like for real. And thank you to Kessa for recommending that. Oh, sorry, hold on. I need to get the actual proper outro because I would be remiss to not do that. This Kirblog topic was suggested by Kessa. If you'd like to suggest topics for videos like these, and if you want to hear me record them in my community Discord server before they release, consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/Kirbifer. So yeah, and thank you. At the moment, we have Cynocephalid, J9, Joshua R. Hopper, Kessa, Kirilu Stromboli, and Wolf Drake, all in the chat with us right now as we're recording this. Probably a good 3-4 days before it comes out on my YouTube channel. Thank you guys for joining and listening in while we record this. You get to hear it a couple days early. So, and we've had lots more cool stuff going on. I've been showing off more balancing act things, and I've been working on a Deltarune animation that I'm in the midst of right now. That'll probably be coming out closer when Chapter 3 and 4 come out. So look forward to that. And yeah, so thank you guys for listening. If you guys have any experiences to share about the voiceover world that you want to impart on anyone, by all means, please leave them in the comments. Maybe other questions, maybe that I can answer, possibly. And thank you all. I hope you learned something. I hope that this has given you a little peek into what it's like, the life of being a voiceover actor on top of 17 other things. And I'll catch you on the next one. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.